Rain hammered the windows of the small two-bedroom apartment in Queens at 12:17 on a Friday morning in October. Julian Carter woke to pounding on his door that cut through the storm's rhythm like gunfire through fog. 6 years of military training meant he was upright and moving before conscious thought caught up, before the civilian part of his brain remembered he wasn't in Kandahar anymore, that the sound was knuckles against wood rather than mortars against compound walls. Through the peephole, he found the last person he expected. Catherine Hayes stood in the hallway soaked to the bone, mascara streaking down her face in dark rivers, her cream silk blouse plastered to her shoulders in a way that would have been indecent if it weren't so clearly the result of catastrophe rather than intention. The untouchable CEO who commanded boardrooms and made billion-dollar decisions without blinking now looked like someone had reached inside her chest and torn out everything that mattered. Julian opened the door without hesitation. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, hoarse in the way voices get when they've been screaming or crying or both. "I'm sorry to barge in like this, Julian. I didn't know where else to go." Behind him, small feet padded across the living room floor. "Daddy, who's at the door?" Sophie appeared in her purple nightgown, with the glow-in-the-dark stars clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since before she could remember having it. Her natural curls, inherited from Julian's side-tight coils that formed a halo around her 6-year-old face, bounced as she moved. At 6 years old, his daughter possessed the kind of perceptiveness that made adults uncomfortable, the ability to see past what people said to what they meant. She studied Catherine with dark brown eyes that missed nothing. "You look sad." Julian started to intervene to apologize for his daughter's bluntness, but Catherine's expression shifted into something that might have been relief. "When I'm sad, Daddy makes me hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows. It helps a lot." The simplicity of the statement, the genuine offer from a child who understood that sometimes comfort came in mugs rather than words, seemed to undo something in Catherine. Her shoulders sagged as if she'd been holding them rigid through pure force of will, and Sophie's kindness had finally given her permission to collapse. That sounds like excellent medicine. 10 minutes later, they gathered in Julian's narrow galley kitchen that smelled like the coffee he'd been drinking since 4 a.m. because sleep remained elusive most nights. Sophie took charge with the confidence of someone who'd watched this ritual dozens of times, positioning herself on the step stool by the stove with the authority of a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. "You have to watch for tiny bubbles," she informed Catherine with the seriousness of someone imparting life or death information. "Not big bubbles. Those mean it's too hot and you'll burn your tongue. Tiny bubbles." Catherine leaned against the counter, wrapped in the dolphin-patterned towel Julian had retrieved from the linen closet, watching Sophie's performance with fascination. "How do you know the difference?" Tiny bubbles whisper. Big bubbles yell. The logic was simultaneously absurd and perfect. Catherine laughed, a real sound that seemed to surprise her with its genuineness. They moved to the living room once the hot chocolate was ready. Sophie perched between the adults on the sagging couch that Julian kept meaning to replace but never quite found the budget for. His daughter counted exactly 7 marshmallows into Catherine's mug with the precision of someone conducting a chemistry experiment, explaining that 7 was the optimal number because it left room for liquid but provided adequate sweetness distribution. "So why are you sad?" Sophie's directness cut through any pretense of small talk. Julian tensed, ready to redirect the conversation into safer territory, but Catherine's expression suggested she welcomed the honesty. "I found out tonight that someone I trusted very much lied to me, someone I was going to marry." Sophie absorbed this information with the gravity it deserved. "Daddy says lying breaks trust, and trust is like glass. You can fix it, but you'll always see the cracks." Catherine's breath caught audibly. "That's exactly right." The story emerged in fragments over the next hour. The engagement party at the Drake Hotel with 200 guests. Dylan Pierce, investment banker, old money disappearing for 20 minutes. Catherine going to find him and discovering him in the coat check room with Melissa. His hand up her dress, her lipstick on his collar. The specific kind of betrayal that came from realizing everyone around you had known and chosen not to tell you. 2 years, Catherine said, staring into her mug like it contained answers she couldn't find anywhere else. They'd been together for 2 years. Everyone knew except me. Sophie's yawn interrupted the confession, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion, despite the drama of having a stranger in their home at 1 in the morning. Julian carried her to bed, her arms wrapping around his neck with the unconscious trust that made his chest ache every single time. Thank you for the help, sous chef. You're welcome, Daddy. His daughter's voice was already blurred with approaching sleep. I hope tomorrow is better than today, Miss Catherine. The benediction from a 6-year-old who'd never met her until tonight hit Catherine visibly. Julian watched tears spill down her face as he tucked Sophie under her summer blanket and returned to the living room to find Catherine standing by the window pretending the tears weren't happening. Rain had softened to a gentle percussion against glass. The city sprawled beyond them, indifferent to personal catastrophes happening in anonymous apartments across its grid. Julian crossed to where she stood and offered her a fresh towel. You'll catch cold. She accepted it without turning, without meeting his eyes. I don't even know why I came here. I got in my car and started driving and somehow ended up at your door. Sometimes we need someone who isn't tangled up in our mess. At work yesterday, technically, you said something in the quarterly review meeting. Catherine finally turned to face him, vulnerability naked on her features in a way he'd never seen during their 3 years working together. You said I was better than that. The memory surfaced sharp and clear. The conference room on the 68th floor where Catherine had been pushing unrealistic projections because the board wanted growth numbers that looked impressive on paper. Julian had watched her compromise her own standards under pressure from men who cared more about their stock portfolios than sustainable business practices, and something in him had snapped. You're better than this, he'd said while 12 executives held their collective breath. You're letting fear drive your decisions. The room had gone silent. Catherine's expression had cycled through anger, shock, and finally something that looked like relief before she'd dismissed everyone and spent the next hour recalculating projections with realistic assumptions. Richard Blackwell, the board chairman, had tried to get Julian fired that afternoon. Catherine had shut him down. I need people who tell me the truth, not people who tell me what I want to hear. Julian had respected her deeply in that moment. Now looking at her in his living room with rain-soaked hair and running mascara, respect was evolving into something far more dangerous. Say that again, she whispered. But look at me this time. Really look at me. He turned to face her fully close enough to see gold flecks in her blue eyes that he'd never noticed in the fluorescent glare of office lighting. Close enough to smell her perfume beneath the rain, something floral and expensive that shouldn't have worked with wet clothing and smeared makeup, but somehow did. You're better than this, Catherine. You're letting fear drive your decisions instead of the strength that makes you who you are. The air between them crackled with the electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. For 3 seconds, Julian counted them old combat habit of marking time in moments that mattered. They stood suspended in possibility. Catherine's gaze dropped to his mouth. His hands flexed with the urge to reach for her. Sophie's door creaked open slightly, breaking the moment like glass shattering. Are you my daddy's girlfriend? His daughter stood in the hallway, backlit by her nightlight, her worn companion dangling from one hand, her expression equal parts curious and hopeful. Catherine took a step back, the spell broken. No, sweetie, this is Miss Hayes. I work with your daddy. Sophie patted closer, studying Catherine with the intensity she usually reserved for interesting bugs or complicated math problems. You look sad, and you came to daddy for help. That's what people do when they like each other. The observation hung in the air with uncomfortable accuracy. Catherine was already kneeling to Sophie's eye level, with a gentleness that suggested this wasn't familiar territory for her. Your daddy is very kind. I needed someone kind tonight. Everybody needs kindness. She extended her small hand with the formality of someone conducting important business. I'm Sophia Carter, but everyone calls me Sophie. What's your name, Catherine Hayes? She shook Sophie's hand with equal seriousness. It's nice to meet you, Sophie. Would you like more hot chocolate? Sophie's hospitality knew no bounds. I can make it without Daddy's help. I'm very responsible. Before Julian could intervene, they were back in the kitchen, Sophie explaining her marshmallow distribution theory, while Catherine listened like these were the most important instructions she'd ever received. The domesticity of the scene, his daughter and his CEO making hot chocolate at 1:30 in the morning, while rain drummed overhead, felt surreal and right in equal measure. By 2 a.m., Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch between them, her head pillowed on Catherine's lap, while Catherine's fingers absently stroked her curls. Julian started to move her to bed, but Catherine shook her head. Let her sleep. She's comfortable. They talked in whispers for another hour. Catherine told him about growing up with parents who died when she was 10, raised by an aunt who valued manners over affection, about building Hayes Enterprises from nothing because creating something mattered more than inheriting something, about Dylan who seemed perfect on paper but who'd never looked at her the way she'd wanted to be seen. Julian told her about Elena, about meeting her in college when they were both too young to understand what forever meant, but stupid enough to believe they could figure it out together. About Elena working as an accountant at Hayes Enterprises. About the car accident 6 years ago that killed his wife 2 days after she'd discovered something wrong in the quarterly financial reports. The police said brake line corrosion. Julian's voice went flat with the kind of control that came from repeating a story until emotion leached out of it. Called it mechanical failure. Case closed in 72 hours. Catherine's expression sharpened. You don't believe that? Elena took the car to the shop the week before. Everything checked out fine. Brake lines don't corrode in 7 days. She studied him with new understanding, puzzle pieces clicking into place. You've been investigating. That's why you stayed at Hayes after she died. The accusation, if it was an accusation, held no judgment. Julian nodded slowly. 6 years, no proof, just questions nobody wants to answer, and coincidences that stack up too neatly. Catherine's hand tightened on Sophie's shoulder, protective instinct for a child she'd met hours ago. What are you going to do if you find proof? Get justice. Make sure whoever killed my wife pays. Make sure they never have the chance to do it to someone else. The conviction in his voice seemed to affect Catherine in ways he couldn't read. She looked down at Sophie sleeping peacefully between them, then back at Julian with an expression that mixed admiration and concern. That's a long time to carry something so heavy. Some things are worth carrying. She nodded like she understood, like maybe she was carrying her own weights that looked different but felt equally burdensome. At 2:30, Catherine finally acknowledged she needed to leave. Julian walked her to the door, hyper-aware that this moment would define what happened next between them. Thank you. Her hand found his fingers interlacing with an ease that suggested this wasn't the first time, despite it being exactly that. For the hot chocolate, for listening, for not judging. You're not pathetic for needing help. You're human. I haven't felt human in a long time. Tonight I felt real. The words hung between them, pregnant with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Catherine started to pull away, but Julian's hand tightened fractionally, keeping her there for one more heartbeat. See you Monday, she smiled, genuine expression that transformed her face from beautiful to devastating. See you Monday. After she left, Julian stood in the doorway listening to her footsteps fade, listening to the elevator chime, listening to the building settle back into silence. Saturday passed in the fugue state that followed sleepless nights and seismic shifts. Sophie demanded pancakes shaped like animals. They walked to the bodega where Sophie got to pick out one piece of candy, while Julian pretended not to notice her selecting two. At the playground, Sophie made friends with a girl named Maya, whose mother smiled at Julian with a particular sympathy reserved for single parents managing alone. Julian's phone stayed silent. He told himself Catherine wouldn't reach out, that Friday night had been a moment out of time, that Monday morning would fold back into professional boundaries. He told himself these things and checked his phone every 20 minutes anyway. Sunday evening at 10:30, Sophie asleep after an elaborate bedtime ritual, his phone finally buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. Thank you again for Friday. See you tomorrow. See. Julian stared at the screen for a full minute, reading those 12 words over and over like they contained encrypted meaning he needed to decode. He typed 6 different responses and deleted them all. Settled finally on glad I could help. 3 dots appeared, immediately danced across his screen for 10 seconds, then disappeared without producing additional message. Julian lay awake until 2 a.m., wondering what she'd almost said, wondering if she was lying awake too in her Park Avenue penthouse, surrounded by luxury that couldn't keep out loneliness. Monday arrived with the inevitability of consequences. Julian made bitter coffee that had gone cold while his mind raced braided Sophie's hair with the competence born from 6 years of practice, working coconut oil through her tight curls, parting carefully, creating 2 neat braids she could wear to school. I love you to the moon and back, she'd told him at the door of their daily ritual. Love you to the moon and back, and all the way around again, he'd responded. Hayes Enterprises rose 72 floors of steel and glass. Julian rode the elevator to the 68th floor where the executive offices occupied space designed to impress visitors and remind employees of hierarchies that mattered. Nina Rodriguez found him before he'd finished his first coffee, her expression telegraphing crisis before she opened her mouth. "Have you seen the news?" Julian pulled up the Tribune on his desktop. The headline dominated the screen: CEO's fiancé makes scene at Hayes Enterprises. Below it, video footage clearly captured on someone's phone. Dylan Pierce drunk in the building's lobby at 7 a.m. security, trying to remove him while he screamed accusations about Catherine using company resources to spy on him. The timestamp read today, 2 hours ago. Jesus, it gets worse. Nina's voice held the particular strain of someone delivering bad news. Emergency board meeting started at 7:30. Blackwell's been in there with Catherine for 90 minutes. Julian was moving before conscious decision caught up, heading toward the boardroom, with Nina calling after him that this was a terrible idea. Through the glass walls he saw them. 12 men in suits arranged around the conference table. Catherine sat isolated at the far end, spine straight, and hands folded with the control of someone refusing to give her enemies the satisfaction of seeing her break. Blackwell held court at the opposite end, silver hair, an expensive suit, and the particular arrogance of men who'd spent their entire lives being told they mattered. Julian pushed through the doors without announcing himself, without asking permission. 12 heads swiveled toward him. Catherine's eyes widened fractionally, the only crack in her composure. Blackwell's voice could have cut glass. "Mr. Carter, this is a private meeting. I need to speak with Miss Hayes." Julian kept his attention locked on Catherine. "It's urgent." Catherine stood with the grace that came from years of maintaining authority in rooms designed to strip it from here. "Excuse me, gentlemen. 5 minutes." The hallway outside felt like a confession booth. Catherine closed the door behind them with a quiet click. "Julian, what are you doing? They're looking for any reason to question my judgment right now. Is it true they're trying to force you out?" She rubbed her temples, exhaustion evident beneath the makeup. "Dylan's threatening to sue the company, claiming I used corporate resources to investigate his personal life." "Did you?" "Of course not. But perception matters more than reality." "The board is spooked. Blackwell's wanted you gone for months. This is just the excuse he's been looking for." Catherine's expression shifted into something harder, CEO armor, snapping back into place. "We can't talk about Friday night here." "I'm not talking about Friday night. I'm talking about the fact that you're being railroaded, and everyone knows it, and nobody's saying anything because it's easier to sacrifice you than fight for what's right." The words came out hotter than Julian intended, carrying 6 years of watching corruption hide behind corporate courtesy. Catherine's voice dropped to barely audible. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Carter. But I'll handle this." The formal address, the return to professional distance after the intimacy of his living room, felt like a door closing. Julian watched her walk back into the boardroom, head high and shoulders squared. He returned to his office and tried to work while his email pinged with the rhythm of a company coming apart. At 11 a.m., the official announcement arrived. From Board of Directors, subject leadership transition. Effective immediately, Catherine Hayes has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into alleged misuse of company resources. Richard Blackwell will serve as acting CEO. Julian Carter has been promoted to interim CFO. Julian read it 3 times before the implications fully landed. They'd bought him. The promotion he'd been working toward for 3 years handed to him now as payment for silence. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. "Congratulations on the promotion. You'll make an excellent CFO." See, the words hit like physical blows. She thought he'd been part of it. His fingers moved across the keyboard with urgency. "This isn't what I wanted." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "We don't always get what we want. Take care of yourself and Sophie." But then another message arrived. "For what it's worth, Friday night was the first time I felt real in years. Thank you for that." The train to Bronzeville took 40 minutes through neighborhoods that documented Chicago's economic geography in brutal clarity. Dorothy Carter's building had good bones, but decades of deferred maintenance showed in cracked sidewalks and windows that didn't quite seal against winter. Julian climbed 3 flights, the elevator had been broken for 2 months, and found Sophie already at his mother's door. His mother looked up with eyes that had watched him grow, from idealistic teenager to Marine to broken veteran to single father. Dorothy Carter, at 62, carried herself with the dignity of women who'd raised children alone through circumstances that would have crushed people with less backbone. What's wrong? The question wasn't whether something was wrong, but what specifically had brought him here on a Monday evening. Sophie absorbed the tension. I'm going to draw in the kitchen so you can talk about grown-up stuff. After she left, Dorothy poured sweet tea without asking, old ritual that predated most of Julian's memories. My boss got screwed over today. Julian's voice came out flat. And I watched it happen, the CEO. Dorothy's tone suggested she already knew more than he'd told her. That woman with the spine made of titanium, they're forcing her out, using her ex's public meltdown as excuse to question her judgment. What are you going to do about it? What can I do? I'm the CFO. They just promoted to keep me quiet. Dorothy's expression hardened in the way that had made teenage Julian reconsider every bad decision. Baby, I didn't raise you to watch injustice happen and do nothing. I could lose my job, your surgery. You think I want that surgery if it means watching my son compromise? Everything I taught him? Dorothy reached across the table, work-worn hands covering his. What does your gut tell you? Julian thought about Catherine at his door at midnight, makeup running and walls destroyed. About her in the boardroom this morning surrounded by enemies. About Elena 6 years ago discovering something wrong and dying 2 days later. My gut says she deserves someone in her corner. Then you already know what to do. Sophie reappeared with a drawing, Julian and Catherine, and a small figure labeled me, standing in front of a building. The caption read, when people choose each other, they make family. The simplicity of it destroyed something in Julian's chest. This is beautiful, baby girl. I'm giving it to Miss Catherine. So she knows we choose her. Dorothy studied the drawing. That woman. You care about her. It wasn't quite a question, but Julian answered anyway. I don't know what I feel. It's too fast and too complicated, and she's the first person you've let yourself care about since Elena died. Dorothy's voice held no judgment. Be careful. Your heart's been locked up tight for 6 years. Opening it again takes more courage than running into burning buildings. Later that night, Sophie asleep in Dorothy's guest room. Julian stood on the balcony watching the city lights. His phone buzzed. Catherine's name on the screen this time rather than unknown number. The message contained no text, just a location pin, her address on Park Avenue. Then I know it's late, but I can't stop thinking about what you said, about having someone in my corner. Julian should have declined, should have maintained professional boundaries already compromised beyond recognition. But he was already calculating train schedules, already choosing courage over safety. Give me 45 minutes. Her building made his apartment complex look like Section 8 housing. Doorman in uniform that cost more than Julian's monthly rent, marble lobby, with chandelier security that verified his identity twice. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. When the doors opened directly into her space, Julian understood for the first time the profound loneliness that came from having everything except people who mattered. The apartment was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful, designed for admiration rather than living. Catherine stood by floor-to-ceiling windows in comfortable jeans and a well-worn Northwestern sweatshirt, her hair loose, no makeup, vulnerability written across features that spent most of their time hidden behind professional armor. I keep ending up at your door, she said without preamble. First Friday night, now asking you here. I don't know what I'm doing. Julian crossed the space between them. Maybe neither of us knows what we're doing. Her laugh came out hollow. I'm supposed to be the one with answers. TEO. Leader. Instead, I'm falling apart. You're human. Being human means falling apart sometimes. I can't afford to be human right now. Not with Blackwell circling and the board questioning my judgment and Dylan threatening lawsuits. Julian's hands found her waist, pulling her against him. She came willingly, head resting against his chest, while his arms wrapped around her and held her through trembling that spoke of tears she refused to let fall. I'm so tired. Her voice muffled against his shirt. Tired of being strong, tired of having all the answers, tired of pretending this doesn't hurt. Then stop pretending. Not here, not with me. The permission undid something. Catherine sagged against him with the full weight of years of holding herself together through force of will alone. Julian held her while her shoulders shook with silent sobs, one hand stroking her hair, with the same gentleness he used when Sophie woke from nightmares. When the crying finally eased, Catherine pulled back enough to look up at him. Eyes red and face blotchy in ways that somehow made her more beautiful because more real. I can't stop thinking about you. The confession came out barely above whisper, about Friday night, about how you looked at me like I was a person instead of a position. Julian's thumb brushed away tears tracking down her cheek. You are a person, brilliant and brave and deserving of more than what they gave you, her breath caught. Tell me again. While meaning it, he cupped her face between his hands, forcing her to hold his gaze. You're better than this, Catherine. You're letting fear drive your decisions instead of the strength that makes you who you are. You're brilliant and brave, and you deserve more than what they gave you. All of them. The air between them charged with something that went beyond attraction. Catherine's hands came up to cover his on her face, holding them there like she was afraid he might pull away. I don't know how to do this, her voice broke. I've spent so long building walls. I don't know how to let anyone in. You already let me in. Julian's forehead dropped to rest against hers, their breath mingling. You let me in Friday night. Maybe before, when the conference room 3 months ago. When you chose truth over comfort, even though it cost you. That was you being brave. No, that was me recognizing someone worth fighting for. The kiss happened in the space between heartbeats, neither quite sure who closed the final distance, but both certain this was inevitable. Catherine's hands slid into his hair, while his tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him. They broke apart, gasping foreheads still pressed together, both trembling. This is a terrible idea, Catherine breathed. Probably the worst. I'm your boss. Technically. Technically, you're on administrative leave. She laughed, sound more real than anything he'd heard from her in 3 years. You're incorrigible. You're stalling. I'm terrified. The admission cracked something open between them. Julian pulled back enough to see her face, to read the truth written in eyes that had spent their entire life learning to hide but were naked now with fear and hope. Of what this, you. The fact that I've known you 3 years, and suddenly I can't imagine my life without you in it. Julian thought about Elena, about years of slow-building love that had felt safe and certain, and ultimately hadn't protected either of them. Thought about Catherine standing in his kitchen, letting his daughter count marshmallows. Maybe some people do work that way. Maybe when you have been alone long enough, you recognize connection when it happens. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. What if it doesn't work? What if we're too broken, then we'll be broken together? Which is better than being broken alone. She kissed him again, slower this time, savoring rather than desperate. They settled on the couch close while her hands mapped his shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, Catherine rested her head against his shoulder with a sigh that sounded like surrender. Stay. It wasn't quite a question, but Julian answered anyway. I can't. Sophie's at Dorothy's, but I need to be there when she wakes up. Disappointment flickered across Catherine's features. Right, of course. But he caught her chin, forced her to meet his eyes. I want to stay, more than you know. But my daughter comes first. Always. The firmness in his voice seemed to affect Catherine in ways he couldn't fully read. Her expression softened. That's exactly what I'd expect you to say. And exactly why I... She stopped herself, swallowed whatever word had almost escaped, but Julian heard it anyway. Love, she'd almost said love. One of the things what Catherine shook her head. Too soon to say. Ask me again after we've survived whatever comes next. After we've destroyed the man who killed my wife, you mean. After we've exposed Blackwell and saved your company. Her expression sobered. You really think Blackwell was involved in Elena's death? I think someone at Hayes killed my wife to protect a secret worth killing for. I think the patterns are too clean to be coincidence. What are you going to do? Find proof, make sure they pay, make sure Elena's death wasn't meaningless. Catherine's arms tightened around him with fierceness that spoke to protective instincts he hadn't expected. Then we do it together. You in my corner and me in yours. The alliance settled between them with the weight of vows. Their goodbye lasted 20 minutes, kisses interspersed with conversation about nothing important, the kind of intimate small talk that built foundations. When Julian finally left, he carried the taste of her on his lips and the certainty that everything had changed. Dorothy found him in the kitchen at 4 a.m. staring at lukewarm coffee. You went to her. Statement rather than question. Yeah. And I think I'm falling in love with someone I barely know, which is either the bravest thing I've ever done or the stupidest. Dorothy poured her own coffee and sat across from him. Your father and I decided we were getting married on our second date. Everyone said we were crazy. 32 years we had before the cancer took him. Not enough, but more than some people get in lifetimes of playing it safe. You think I should do this. I think you've been playing it safe for 6 years. Safe is how you survive. Brave is how you live. Elena would want me to be happy. Lena would want you to be happy, and your daughter to have a home, and your heart to remember how to be full instead of empty. Dorothy's hand covered his. That woman tonight, she make you feel full. Yeah, she does. Then stop questioning and start choosing. Morning arrived with Sophie announcing that Grandma made the good pancakes. They ate together while Sophie chattered about her drawing project and whether Miss Catherine would like it. Julian met his mother's eyes and saw understanding there. Yeah, baby, we can invite her for dinner. Sophie's grin could have powered Chicago's grid. Perfect. I'll make her a special drawing, one that shows her she's part of our family now. Hayes Enterprises loomed ahead. Julian rode the elevator to the 68th floor where his new office waited larger than before corner windows, the kind of space that communicated power. Nina was already there, worry written across features she usually kept neutral. Blackwell's called a meeting, 10 a.m. Mandatory attendance for all department heads. Julian booted his computer and found the email. Organizational chart showing himself as CFO permanently. 3 senior analysts replaced policies he'd helped Catherine implement, marked for elimination. They'd already decided the future. This meeting was theater. He texted Catherine. Blackwell's moving fast. Meeting at 10. I think he's going to dismantle everything you built. Let him try. I'm not done fighting. What's your plan? Make him think he's won. Gather evidence while he gets comfortable. Then burn his empire down around him. I'm in. Whatever you need. The conference room smelled like ambition and expensive cologne. Blackwell positioned himself at the head Catherine's seat with territorial certainty. 12 department heads filled the remaining chairs. Julian took his designated spot close enough to hear everything, but far enough to avoid appearing threatening. Blackwell's smile could have sold ice to Alaskans. Thank you all for coming. I know the past few days have been turbulent, but I want to assure you that stability is my top priority. The word stability landed with particular irony. Julian kept his expression neutral while his mind cataloged everything. We'll be implementing operational adjustments to improve efficiency and maximize shareholder value. Blackwell clicked to the first slide. As you can see, we're streamlining several departments. Streamlining. Corporate euphemism for cutting programs that didn't generate immediate profit. Julian watched the chart populate with changes that erased 3 years of Catherine's work. Employee education assistance eliminated. Extended parental leave reduced to federal minimum. Ethical sourcing requirements replaced with language about competitive pricing. Marcus Chen from operations raised his hand. What about the education program? We have employees mid-degree who are counting on that support. Blackwell's expression communicated sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. I understand this creates hardship. However, we need to focus resources on core business functions. Translation, we're abandoning people who trusted us. The meeting continued for 90 minutes, each slide revealing more dismantling. R&D budget cut 30%. Quality control standards relaxed. Supplier contracts renegotiated. Julian felt rage building but kept his expression professionally neutral, played the role of cooperative executive while memorizing every detail. Finally, Blackwell turned to Julian directly. Mr. Carter, I'll need you to meet with our new financial analysts this afternoon. Brandon Ellis and Tyler Morrison from Stratton Consulting. Julian recognized the names. Stratton specialized in corporate restructuring that meant asset stripping. Brandon and Tyler weren't analysts, they were executioners. Of course. What specifically do they need full transparency into our financial operations? Every analysis you've run over the past 3 years. Catherine's pet projects received significant funding despite questionable ROI. The accusation hung in the air. Blackwell was suggesting Catherine had mismanaged funds, setting groundwork for potential criminal charges. I'll prepare comprehensive documentation. Excellent. Blackwell's smile widened. I appreciate your team spirit. Not everyone has been so cooperative. The implicit threat was clear: cooperate or join Catherine in exile. After the meeting, Nina was already in Julian's office, laptop open, in expression grim. 3 senior engineers just submitted resignation letters. People are jumping ship. Can't blame them. Blackwell's burning the place down and calling it renovation. What are we going to do? Nina's use of "we carried weight" Julian hadn't expected. How much do you trust me? Nina's expression shifted into something harder. Enough to do illegal things if they're for the right reasons. I need you to make copies of specific files. Financial records going back 8 years. Everything Blackwell doesn't want anyone looking at. You think he's hiding something. I know he's hiding something. My wife found it 6 years ago and died 2 days later. Nina absorbed this without visible reaction. Your wife worked here. Elena Carter, accountant, discovered irregularities in quarterly reports and was going to report them. Brake lines failed on her way to meet with outside counsel. Police called it mechanical failure. Jesus Christ. And you've been investigating ever since. Julian nodded. 6 years staying invisible, waiting for whoever killed her to make a mistake. Nina stood and locked the office door, pulled the blinds closed. Already started. Encrypted copies on 3 separate cloud drives. The alliance formed in that moment felt inevitable. Why are you doing this? Nina's expression went distant. My father lost everything to corporate embezzlement when I was 12. He died 3 years later from cancer he couldn't afford to treat. So when you ask why, because people like Blackwell destroy lives and call it business strategy. And somebody needs to make them pay. Julian understood that motivation in his bones. Then let's make them pay. They worked through lunch compiling files, cross-referencing transactions, building a map of money flowing through haze in patterns that looked legitimate until you understood what you were seeing. Shell companies with addresses that didn't exist. Contracts for services never rendered. By 3 p.m., Julian had enough documentation to understand the scope. $78 million over 8 years. Blackwell had been systematically embezzling since before Catherine's father died. His phone buzzed. Catherine. How bad is it? Julian photographed 3 pages of damning transactions and sent them. Her response came 30 seconds later. Holy shit, how long has this been happening? 8 years minimum. Elena found the pattern 6 years ago. That's what got her killed. I need to see everything. Tonight, my place. I'll make it work. At 4 p.m., Brandon and Tyler arrived with the confidence of people accustomed to being the smartest in any room. Mr. Carter, Brandon's handshake was calculated pressure. We're looking forward to working with you. They spent 3 hours probing for loyalty testing, whether Julian would defend Catherine's decisions or distance himself. He walked the line carefully, providing information that was accurate but incomplete. This ethical sourcing initiative Catherine championed. Brandon tapped his tablet. The premium you paid over standard market rates, how did you justify that long-term relationship building? Suppliers who feel valued provide better service, faster response times. But quantifying those benefits is difficult. Quantifying anything that matters is difficult. Customer loyalty, employee morale, brand reputation, none shows up in quarterly earnings, but all drives long-term value. Tyler spoke for the first time. Mr. Blackwell has concerns that personal ideology may have influenced financial decision-making. Julian let the statement hang. Personal ideology. You mean ethics. I mean decisions that prioritize image over profitability. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Hayes built its reputation on quality and ethics. Strip that away, and you're left with another generic manufacturer. Brandon and Tyler exchanged glances. They'd identified resistance. We'll need copies of all financial analyses by tomorrow morning. Brandon stood. Complete transparency. It wasn't a request. After they left, Nina reappeared. They're building a case, not just against Catherine, against anyone who might defend her. Then we need to build a better case faster. His phone rang. Dorothy's number. Baby, I just saw the news about your company. You doing okay? I'm managing. Don't lie to your mother. What's happening? I'll explain later. Can you keep Sophie tonight? I have something I need to handle. This about that woman? Her name is Catherine. And yes, Dorothy's pause carried weight. Be careful. Your heart hasn't been this vulnerable in 6 years. I know. But you're doing it anyway. Yeah, I am. His phone buzzed. Catherine. Brandon and Tyler are corporate raiders. They strip companies and sell them for parts. Blackwell's not restructuring. He's preparing to liquidate everything. How much time do we have? 6 weeks, maybe 8. Then we move faster. Tonight we build the case. Tomorrow we start gathering allies. By next week we go nuclear. Nuclear expose everything publicly. Media, regulatory agencies, law enforcement. The train to Manhattan took 40 minutes. Catherine's door opened before he knocked. She pulled him inside and into her arms in one motion, holding on with the desperation of someone drowning. I'm scared. I've never been this scared. Good. Fear means you understand what we're risking. What if we lose? Then we lose knowing we fought for something that mattered. They spread files across her dining room table. Transaction records painting pictures of systematic theft. Contracts funneling Hayes money through shell companies. Board meeting minutes where Catherine's father had questioned financial irregularities months before he died suddenly of a heart attack. My father died 6 months after flagging these discrepancies. She touched the medical examiner's report. He was 58, healthy, ran marathons. Then sudden cardiac arrest. You think Blackwell killed him too? I think there are drugs that induce heart attacks without leaving traces. I think my father died because he got too close. And Elena definitely died for it. Catherine's hand found his across the table. I'm so sorry. She tried to protect my company and I never knew. She'd want you to finish what she started. Then let's make it mean something. They worked through the night building a case that would hold up under scrutiny. By 3 a.m. they had a presentation that would destroy Blackwell's life. By 4 a.m. they'd identified 3 journalists who might publish. By 5 a.m. Julian's eyes burned with exhaustion, but they'd built something real. Catherine made coffee. She handed him a mug and leaned against the counter. Why are you doing this? You could take the CFO position. Let me fight alone. Keep yourself safe. Julian thought about Elena's photograph, about Sophie, about 6 years of investigation. Because some things matter more than safety. Because my daughter needs to see her father stand for something. Because you deserve someone in your corner. That's not an answer, not really. He set down his coffee and crossed to where she stood. Because I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than Blackwell ever could, but here we are anyway. The confession landed between them with weight neither had anticipated. Catherine's breath caught. Her hands came up to frame his face. Repeat those words. Don't look away. I'm falling in love with you, Catherine Hayes. Have been since you showed up at my door at midnight. And it terrifies me because I haven't felt this since Elena died, and I don't know if loving again means betraying her memory, but I can't stop it. Here we are, 2 broken people choosing each other in the middle of a war we didn't start but refused to lose. The kiss was different this time. Less desperate, more intentional. Catherine's hands slid into his hair while his found the small of her back. When they finally broke apart, Catherine rested her forehead against his. Stay. I know you need to get back to Sophie, but please, just a few more hours, until 7. Then I have to go. They moved to the couch where exhaustion caught up with adrenaline. Catherine curled against Julian's side, his arms wrapped around her. Sleep took them both around 5:30. Julian woke at 6:45. Catherine still pressed against him. Morning. Sleep okay? Better than I have in weeks. What happens now? Catherine's expression shifted into CEO mode. Now I call Patricia Monroe, my lawyer, former federal prosecutor who specializes in corporate fraud. When this morning, for Blackwell realizes we're building a case, Julian checked his watch. I need to get Sophie, but call me after you talk to Patricia. Dorothy's apartment smelled like bacon and coffee. Sophie sat at the kitchen table working on her drawing. Daddy, you're back. Did you save Miss Catherine? Working on it, baby girl. Good. She needs saving. Grandma says everybody needs saving sometimes, and the people who love them do the saving. Dorothy appeared with plates. You look exhausted. Long night, but productive. This woman, Catherine, she worth what you're risking. Yeah, Mom, she's worth it. Then I'll pray you both survive what's coming. His phone buzzed at 8:15. Catherine, Patricia's coming to my place at 9. Can you make it on my way? Dorothy offered to take Sophie to school. That woman needs you. Go. Patricia Monroe was exactly what Julian expected, 55 with close-cropped natural hair, going gray, dressed in a charcoal suit, carrying herself with confidence from years in federal courtrooms. She shook Julian's hand with grip that tested whether he'd fold. Mr. Carter, Catherine speaks highly of you. Just Julian. They settled in Catherine's living room while documents covered every surface. Patricia spent 30 minutes reviewing evidence. When she finally looked up, her expression had hardened. This is significant. If we can authenticate these transactions, we have grounds for criminal prosecution. Fraud, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty at minimum. Can you authenticate them? I have forensic accountants who can trace money through shell companies. I have investigators. I have relationships with federal prosecutors who'd love to take down someone like Blackwell. She tapped her tablet. The question isn't whether we can build a case. The question is how we deploy it. What do you mean we have several options? Board presentation, SEC investigation, or nuclear leak everything to the press? What would you recommend? Combination approach. We leak strategically while simultaneously filing with regulatory agencies. Hit from every angle. How long do we have? Patricia glanced at Catherine. How far along is the liquidation they brought in corporate raiders? Best case 6 weeks before they start selling divisions. Then we move in 72 hours. Patricia's tone left no room for argument. I'll need complete cooperation. And I need you both to understand that once we start this, there's no going back. Let him come. Catherine's voice could have cut steel. I'm done being afraid. Julian's phone buzzed. Nina, urgent. Blackwell just ordered complete financial audit. He's looking for evidence to use against Catherine. We need to move now. He showed the message to Patricia and Catherine. All right then, we accelerate. I'll contact journalists today. You two compile everything. And Julian, she turned to him with intensity. You need to be careful. You're in the most vulnerable position. I'm aware of the risks. Are you? Because you have a daughter to think about. If this goes wrong, my daughter learns her father was a coward who watched injustice happen and did nothing. Julian's jaw set. I'd rather risk everything and lose than live with that. Patricia studied him before nodding. All right, then let's go to war. The rest of Tuesday dissolved into frantic preparation. By Tuesday evening, they had a plan. Wednesday morning, Patricia would meet with James Morrison from the Chicago Tribune and Sarah Chen from the Wall Street Journal. By Wednesday afternoon, both papers would run preliminary stories. By Thursday, the SEC would receive formal complaints. Julian's phone rang at 7 p.m. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Hello, silence. Then a voice he didn't recognize, digitally distorted. You should have let her burn Marine. Now you're both targets. Watch your daughter. The line went dead. Julian's blood turned to ice. He immediately called Dorothy. We're fine, baby. Sophie's doing homework. What's wrong? Lock the doors, all of them. Don't answer for anyone except me. I'm coming over. Julian, you're scaring me. Someone just threatened Sophie. I'm 15 minutes away. Lock the doors. He was already moving, grabbing his jacket, his keys, his service weapon from the locked case. The Beretta M9 felt familiar in ways civilian life never had. Catherine called, her voice tight with panic. I just got a text, anonymous. Said they know where you live, that accidents happen. They threatened Sophie. Jesus Christ, we need to call the police and tell them what they'll take a report and my daughter will still be in danger. Then what do? We finish this. Fast. Before Blackwell realizes how much evidence we have. Julian drove faster than was legal. Dorothy met him at the door. Sophie visible behind her, looking scared. Daddy, what's wrong? He pulled them both inside and locked the door, checked windows, verified every access point. Then he knelt to Sophie's level. Baby girl, we're going to play a game. It's called Stay at Grandma's House Where It's Safe. Is someone trying to hurt us? The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised him. Sophie was 6 and perceptive and deserved honesty. Some people are very angry at Daddy right now, so we're being extra careful because of Miss Catherine. Statement rather than question. Julian nodded. Sophie's expression went thoughtful. Grandma says when bad people try to scare good people, the good people have to be braver. Are you being brave, Daddy? Trying to be. Then you're going to win. Because brave people always win in stories. Real life isn't a story, baby. Maybe it should be. Julian held his daughter close enough to feel her heartbeat. His phone buzzed. Catherine. Patricia says we can provide security. Former FBI. 24-hour protection until this is over. Julian thought about refusing about pride and independence, but he also thought about that distorted voice saying, watch your daughter. Okay, send them. 2 former FBI agents arrived at 8 p.m. Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez. They cleared the apartment with professional efficiency, established security protocols. Julian watched them work and felt something loosen in his chest. Sophie was safe. Dorothy was safe. His phone rang at 9:15, Patricia's number. Tell me you have good news. Better than good. Morrison at the Tribune is running the story tomorrow morning. Front page full investigation. The Journal is publishing simultaneously. By tomorrow afternoon, Blackwell will be radioactive. What about the SEC filing goes in at 8 a.m.? They'll freeze Hayes' assets. Blackwell won't be able to liquidate or flee. In criminal charges, U.S. Attorney's Office has opened preliminary inquiry. If charges come, and they will, we're looking at federal prosecution. Wire fraud conspiracy, possibly murder. Murder carries weight that made Julian's breath catch. Can you prove it? Patricia's voice gentled. Probably not to criminal standard, but civil standard is lower. We can destroy him financially even if criminal charges don't stick. It would have to be enough. After hanging up, Julian called Catherine, heard relief in her voice. It's happening. Tomorrow this goes public and Blackwell's empire collapses. She laughed, sounds slightly hysterical. I should feel triumphant. Instead, I'm just exhausted. That's normal. Adrenaline crash. Will it be enough? Then we keep fighting. Julian's voice hardened with conviction. We don't stop until he pays. For Elena, for your father, for every person he destroyed. Catherine's breath shuddered. I love you. I know it's fast and probably stupid, but I love you and I needed you to know before tomorrow happens. The confession landed in Julian's chest with weight that felt like coming home. He thought about Elena, about 6 years of grief, but Elena would want him to live, would want Sophie to have a family. I love you too. Have since you stood in my kitchen at 1 a.m. letting my daughter teach you about marshmallow distribution theory. Say it one more time so I know it's real. I love you, Catherine Hayes. I love your strength and your vulnerability and the way you're choosing to fight. I love that you see me as more than a CFO or a single dad trying to survive. I love you, and whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. The silence stretched. Then Catherine's voice came through, thick with tears. Together. I like the sound of that. They talked for another hour about nothing important. The kind of conversation that built foundations. When they finally hung up, Julian stood at Dorothy's window watching the city lights. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwell's empire would collapse. Tomorrow, justice would finally start catching up. But tonight, Julian stood in his mother's apartment with Sophie safe and Catherine's I love you still resonating in his chest and felt something he hadn't felt since Elena died. Hope. Fragile and precious and absolutely terrifying. But real. The Tribune hit newsstands at 6:30 Wednesday morning with a headline designed for maximum devastation. Hayes Enterprises CEO accused of $78 million embezzlement scheme. Julian read it on his phone while making coffee in Dorothy's kitchen. Morrison had done extraordinary work weaving together financial records and witness testimony into narrative that made Blackwell's crimes comprehensible. The Journal's piece published online simultaneously approaching the story from different angle: corporate governance failures, board oversight, inadequacies. Catherine called at 7 a.m. Have you seen it? Reading it now, they did good work. Blackwell called emergency board session for 11. Probably thinks he can spin this. Are you going? Yeah, I'm going. They can throw me out if they want, but I'm going to look every single one of those cowards in the face first. Then I'm going with you. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You went to war for me and Elena. Now I go to war for you. Julian arrived at Hayes at 9 a.m. to find chaos. Reporters camped outside. Employees gathered speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Security presence doubled. Nina met him at his office. SEC froze all assets at 8. Nobody can access operating accounts. Payroll's frozen. Everything's frozen. How long until accounts reopen? Patricia says minimum 2 weeks. Could be months. Gets worse. Blackwell's lawyer released statement claiming this is coordinated attack by disgruntled former CEO. At 10:30, Patricia arrived with 2 associates carrying briefcases. She dressed for war, navy suit, minimal jewelry, expression that communicated decades in federal courtrooms. Catherine here yet? On her way. Good. We go in together. United front. The boardroom felt like walking into ambush. 12 board members arranged around the table. Blackwell held court at the head Catherine's seat. Catherine entered at exactly 11 a.m. with Julian and Patricia flanking her like honor guard. Every eye tracked her movement. Blackwell's expression cycled through surprise and rage. Miss Hayes, I don't recall you being invited. Catherine's voice could have cut glass. This is my company, my father's legacy. I don't need invitation. Actually, Blackwell's lawyer spoke. You're currently suspended. Your presence constitutes trespassing. Patricia stepped forward. My client has every right to defend herself against false allegations. Unless you'd like to explain to federal prosecutors why you're denying her due process. The lawyer's expression flickered. He knew Patricia's reputation. Charles Hammond cleared his throat. Perhaps we should hear what Miss Hayes has to say. Given the explosive nature of this morning's news coverage, explosive is generous. Blackwell's tone dripped contempt. It's a coordinated smear campaign. My leadership style. Catherine's voice stayed level. You mean programs that prioritized ethics over profit margins? I mean decisions that cost shareholders millions while you pursued personal crusades. Personal crusades that turned Hayes into company people wanted to work for. That attracted top talent and built brand loyalty. The exchange crystallized battle lines. Patricia opened her briefcase with theatrical precision and withdrew a document that made Blackwell's lawyer go pale. Mr. Blackwell, I'm Patricia Monroe representing Miss Hayes. I have here sworn affidavit from Dylan Pierce detailing how you orchestrated his public confrontation with Miss Hayes as pretext for her suspension. That's absurd. Mr. Pierce has provided emails showing you contacted him 6 weeks ago, showed him photographs of his affair, threatened to expose him unless he created public scene. Patricia slid the document across the table. Board members leaned forward to read. This proves nothing. Pierce is clearly collaborating with Catherine. We also have financial records. Patricia produced another document. 8 years of transactions routing Hayes money through shell companies into accounts you control. $78 million embezzled. Those are legitimate business expenses. Expenses to companies that don't exist. Addresses that are empty lots. Services never rendered. She kept producing documents. We have testimony from Elena Carter, Mr. Carter's late wife, who discovered these irregularities 6 years ago. She drafted email to Miss Hayes exposing your fraud. 2 days later, she died when her brake lines mysteriously failed. The room went silent. Every face turned toward Julian. My wife tried to protect this company. Julian's voice came out flat, controlled. She found Blackwell's theft and died before she could report it. The police called it mechanical failure. Convenient timing. I'm not suggesting. Patricia cut across Blackwell's objection. I'm stating fact. Elena Carter discovered fraud. She died under suspicious circumstances. The pattern is undeniable. Charles Hammond looked like he'd aged 10 years. Patricia, you're making serious allegations. Do you have proof enough to trigger federal investigation? Enough to freeze Hayes' assets? Enough to destroy Mr. Blackwell's reputation? She turned to Blackwell. You spent 8 years stealing. You killed at least one person, possibly 3. Blackwell's composure finally cracked. This is character assassination. I've given 15 years to Hayes. You've given 15 years of theft disguised as service. I move that Richard Blackwell be terminated for cause effective immediately. Charles's voice carried weight of age and authority. All benefits forfeited, full cooperation required. Seconded. The vote happened quickly, 10 in favor, 1 abstention. Blackwell couldn't vote stripped of authority. For a long moment, Blackwell sat frozen. Then rage overtook calculation and he surged to his feet. You're nothing. His attention locked on Julian. Washed-up Marine playing CFO. I'm the man who kept my wife's memory alive for 6 years. Julian stood slowly. The man who raised our daughter alone. The man who just destroyed your empire. Blackwell lunged. Julian sidestepped with combat reflexes, let momentum carry Blackwell past him into Patricia's waiting associates. Security arrived within seconds. They cuffed Blackwell with practiced efficiency while he screamed about lawsuits. Richard Blackwell, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The detective, reading rights, looked tired. Additional charges pending investigation into deaths of Elena Carter and Thomas Hayes. They led Blackwell away. The boardroom settled into shocked silence. Charles cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, the board would like to extend formal apology. We failed in our oversight duties. Catherine's voice stayed steady. You failed my father. You failed Elena Carter. You failed every employee who trusted Hayes. The condemnation landed heavy. If you're willing, we'd like to reinstate you as CEO effective immediately. Full authority, full board support. For a long moment, Catherine didn't respond. Julian watched her weigh the offer. Then she shook her head. Thank you, Charles. But no, I'm not interested in returning to Hayes Enterprises. Shock rippled through room. Catherine Charles started. I built this company once. She cut across his objection. I can build something better. Something new. Her gaze found Julian's. I'm starting foundation for children who've lost parents to corporate negligence or violence. Kids like Sophie. And I'm taking Mr. Carter with me. The announcement settled with weight of irrevocable decisions. Are you certain? Charles's voice carried genuine concern. Promote internally. Find someone who understands culture and values. Catherine gathered her papers. My time here is done. I want purpose beyond profit. Life instead of just career. Patricia and Julian flanked Catherine as they left past employees who stopped to watch into elevator that descended 70 floors. Outside, reporters swarmed. Catherine stopped on the sidewalk and delivered statement Patricia had prepared. Richard Blackwell stole $78 million from Hayes Enterprises over 8 years. He murdered my father and Julian Carter's wife to protect his crimes. Today he was arrested. Justice is beginning. She paused. I'm resigning as CEO to start foundations supporting children who've lost parents to corporate negligence. Because some things matter more than quarterly earnings. Family matters. Truth matters. Standing up to people who think power makes them untouchable, that matters most of all. Questions exploded, but Catherine was already walking away, Julian beside her. They drove to Dorothy's apartment. Sophie burst through the door, launching herself at Catherine. You won! Grandma said you won! Catherine caught her and held on. We won! All of us together. Dorothy appeared in the doorway. You look like you could use pot roast and sweet tea. All of those sound perfect. They ate together around Dorothy's kitchen table, 4 people who'd been strangers 6 weeks ago, now configured into something that looked like family. Sophie chattered about her drawing project, which was finally finished. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands in front of building with windows full of children's faces. Caption read, The Elena Carter Memorial Foundation, where families are made. Julian's throat closed completely. He looked at Catherine and saw tears tracking down her face. You named it after Mama. Sophie's voice carried simple certainty. She tried to help people, right? Even though it was scary. So now we help people the way she would have wanted. The wisdom of 6-year-olds who processed world through art and emotion. Julian pulled his daughter into his lap and held her while crying for first time since Elena's funeral. Not grief exactly, but release of weight. Catherine's hand found his across the table. We're going to make something beautiful. All of us. Something Elena would be proud of. The foundation took shape over following months. Catherine liquidated personal investments to provide seed funding. Julian brought financial expertise. Dorothy contributed child development insights. Sophie served as consultant on what scared children actually needed. The brownstone in Park Slope that became foundation headquarters had been abandoned for 3 years. Beautiful bones buried under neglect. They renovated through November and December, transforming empty spaces into art therapy rooms and counseling offices. But money was tight. By January, the foundation was hemorrhaging funds. We have operating capital for 6 more weeks. Catherine sat at their kitchen table. They'd moved into the Park Slope brownstone together in November, surrounded by spreadsheets. Maybe 8 if we cut staff. We're not cutting staff. Then we need a miracle. The miracle arrived 3 days later in phone call. Julian almost didn't answer. Carter, this is David Chen from Nexus Technologies. Do you remember consulting for us 4 years ago? Vaguely. We're going public next week. The 2% equity we gave you is worth approximately $340,000. Your stake vests tomorrow. The number didn't compute at first. $340,000. Enough for Dorothy's surgery. Enough for the foundation to survive. When he told Catherine, she cried. We're going to make it. The money changed things. Dorothy got her surgery in February, successful recovery, smooth. The foundation hired 4 more counselors, expanded to serve 12 families. But success brought challenges. 3 clients defaulted. A competitor sued baseless but expensive. Grants rejected. Some nights, Julian lay awake calculating reserves. Not everything was perfect. Former colleagues refused to speak to them. The foundation's first event had only 4 families show up. Staff quit, mistakes were made. But the imperfections made it real. made it theirs. Christmas Eve found them in Foundation's main room. 16 children between ages 5 and 12 who'd lost parents. Sophie appointed herself welcome committee. Julian worked with 8-year-old boy whose father died in construction accident. It's not fair. No, it's not. Does it get better? Julian gave honesty instead of platitudes. It changes. Pain becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you. What fills it? This. Helping kids like you, living instead of just surviving. At 3, they gathered everyone. Catherine and Julian stood together, Sophie between them. This foundation exists because someone cared enough to fight. Elena Carter discovered fraud and died trying to expose it. They found justice. But more importantly, they found purpose. Sophie raised her hand. You're allowed to be sad, but you're also allowed to be happy, and you're allowed to build new families. Miss Catherine isn't my mama, but she's family, because families are people who choose each other, and we choose you. Several parents sobbed. Children who'd been holding themselves together allowed themselves to crack. After everyone left, they stood in space they'd built from determination and love. We did it. Elena did it. We just carried it forward. Julian pulled out Elena's photograph. Yeah, she'd approve. 6 months later, Foundation served 43 families across 2 locations. Staff of 18, waiting list that broke Julian's heart. Blackwell's trial concluded in August. 15 years federal prison. Civil judgments totaling $84 million. Murder charges never materialized, but wrongful death suits succeeded. Julian attended sentencing with Catherine. Afterward, this doesn't bring them back. No, but it makes sure he can't hurt anyone else. Does it feel like enough? Yeah, it feels like enough. 1 year after that midnight knock, they stood on Foundation steps. Julian in button-down, Catherine in simple dress with engagement ring, Sophie between them, Dorothy beside them. All 4 smiling genuinely. Families visible through windows celebrating. Sign reading Elena Carter Memorial Foundation, where love still lives. Autumn leaves falling. Interracial families showing love, transcending everything. Inside that night, Julian found Catherine on their balcony. What are you thinking? That 1 year ago I showed up at your door looking for safety I didn't know existed. Julian turned her to face him. Say it one last time. So I remember forever. You gave me back my life. You and Sophie and Dorothy and this impossible family. I love you more than I thought possible, and I'm going to spend rest of my life proving that. Then I guess you're stuck with me. Permanent sounds perfect. Julian thought about Elena's photograph, about 6 years of investigation. But standing with Catherine, Sophie safe inside Foundation, bearing Elena's name, Julian understood. Elena would want this. Survival wasn't betrayal. Living wasn't forgetting. Sometimes the dead gave permission through absence. Catherine's voice. Where'd you go? Just thinking about Elena, about whether she'd be okay with us. And I think she'd tell me to stop overthinking and start living. I think she'd be right. They went inside to bed they'd shared for months. Julian held Catherine and felt grateful for midnight visits and hot chocolate and daughters who saw truth. His last thought, Elena would be proud of building something that helped kids survive, of choosing love after grief, of teaching Sophie that broken people could heal. That was legacy worth leaving. Outside, snow began falling, first of season. Inside, 5 people slept under roof they'd chosen, protected by love they'd built, where love still lives. In brownstones in Brooklyn, in foundations bearing names of people who died protecting others, in families from choice, in warriors learning to be soft, in queens learning to be human, in the space between midnight and morning, where broken people chose each other and called it home. The morning arrived with the particular quality of light that made Brooklyn look like a painting someone had commissioned specifically to illustrate the concept of home. Julian stood at the kitchen window of the brownstone they'd renovated from ruins, watching autumn transform Park Slope into something that belonged on postcards tourists would buy and never send. Behind him, Catherine moved through their kitchen with the efficient grace of someone who'd finally learned that perfection mattered less than presence. She was making pancakes, not the elaborate animal shapes Julian attempted on special occasions, but simple circles that would taste exactly right because she'd made them with Sophie supervising marshmallow distribution for the hot chocolate that would accompany breakfast. Daddy, can I invite the new kids to my birthday party? Sophie appeared in the doorway wearing the purple dress Dorothy had made for her 8th birthday next week, already accessorized with the particular confidence that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally. The ones who just started at the foundation. They looked sad. Julian turned from the window and studied his daughter taller, now missing another tooth, her natural curls pulled into two careful braids Catherine had learned to manage, with the same determination she'd once applied to hostile board meetings. Sophie at 8 possessed the same perceptiveness she'd had at 6, but time and security had transformed it from defense mechanism into genuine gift for seeing people's pain and wanting to heal it. How many kids are we talking about? 6. Maybe 7 if Marcus brings his little brother. Sophie's tone suggested this was an entirely reasonable number, despite their apartment already hosting 12 children for celebration. They need to see that birthdays can still be happy, even when you're sad about other stuff. Catherine caught Julian's eye across the kitchen, smiled in that particular way that communicated entire conversations without words. They'd had this discussion before Sophie's tendency to turn every personal event into therapeutic intervention for children who needed it. They'd agreed that if their daughter wanted to build community from celebration, they'd support it, even when it meant chaos. 7 is fine, baby girl, but you're helping Grandma make the cake. Sophie's grin could have powered the entire borough. Can we make it chocolate with vanilla frosting? That's what Mama liked, right? The casual way she referenced Elena, present tense. Like Julian's late wife was just temporarily absent rather than gone, no longer carved hollows in his chest, the way it had for the first year after Catherine entered their lives. Time and therapy and Catherine's patient insistence that loving again didn't erase what came before had transformed grief from open wound into scar tissue that ached sometimes but no longer bled. Yeah, baby, that's exactly what your mama liked. Sophie disappeared back toward her room to continue whatever art project currently consumed her attention, leaving Julian and Catherine alone in the kitchen that smelled like coffee and maple syrup and the particular brand of domestic happiness neither had believed possible 3 years ago. Catherine crossed to where he stood and wrapped her arms around him from behind, chin resting on his shoulder, while they both looked out at the street where kids played and neighbors walked dogs, and life continued with the beautiful mundanity of places where people felt safe enough to be boring. You okay? Her voice carried the particular gentleness she'd developed for moments when the past surfaced without warning. Julian covered her hands with his, feeling the engagement ring he'd given her 6 months ago. Simple band with single diamond, nothing like the ostentatious rock Dylan had presented, but chosen specifically because Catherine had cried when she saw it and said it was perfect. Yeah, just thinking about how different everything is from 2 years ago. Catherine's arms tightened fractionally. Different good or different complicated? Both. He turned in her embrace so he could see her face read the truth written in blue eyes that had learned to be vulnerable with him. Different good because we built something real. Different complicated because some days I still can't believe this is my life. The foundation had exceeded every projection they'd made in those early desperate months when money was hemorrhaging and success felt theoretical. What had started as single brownstones serving 16 families had expanded into 3 locations across Brooklyn and Queens with satellite partnerships in the Bronx and Manhattan. They employed 42 people, therapists and art instructors and case managers and administrative staff serving 273 children who'd lost parents to violence or negligence, or the particular cruelty of systems that valued profit over human life. The Elena Carter Memorial Foundation had become exactly what Julian had imagined during those long nights after his wife died, when justice felt impossible and meaning seemed like luxury he couldn't afford. They'd taken her death and transformed it into something that mattered, that helped kids survive what Sophie had survived, that proved love was stronger than the violence that tried to destroy it. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought complications neither had fully anticipated. The New York Times had run a feature story 3 months ago, full-page spread with photographs of the foundation interviews with families they'd helped deep dive into Blackwell's crimes and the corporate corruption that had enabled them. The article was beautiful and thorough and had generated donation spike that funded operations for 8 months. It had also meant Julian's phone rang constantly with interview requests, speaking invitations, people wanting to turn their story into inspiration, porn that stripped away the pain and left only sanitized narrative about triumph over adversity. Catherine had handled the attention with CEO grace that came from years of managing public perception, but Julian struggled with commodifying Elena's death into teachable moments for strangers who'd never known her, never understood what it cost to transform tragedy into purpose. His phone buzzed on the counter reminder about the speaking engagement that he'd agreed to next week at Columbia Business School. Guest lecture on ethical leadership and corporate responsibility, using Hayes Enterprises as case study in what happened when boards failed their oversight duties. Patricia had encouraged him to accept. You have platform now. Use it to make sure what happened to Elena doesn't happen to someone else's wife. The logic was sound, but the execution felt performative in ways that made Julian's skin crawl. Standing in front of business students who'd never worked a day in their lives, explaining how his wife died because someone valued quarterly earnings over human life, watching them take notes like this was abstract problem rather than Julian's actual history, it felt like betrayal, even when he knew rationally it wasn't. You're overthinking again. Catherine's voice pulled him back to present. I can see it in your face, the Columbia thing. Julian nodded, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions that came with monetizing trauma in service of prevention. You don't have to do it. We have enough funding. You don't owe anyone your pain. But he did, didn't he? That was the trap of survival. The implicit obligation to make meaning from suffering, to ensure that Elena's death and Catherine's near destruction and Sophie's motherless childhood amounted to something beyond statistics and articles about corporate malfeasance. I want to do it. Julian's voice came out more certain than he felt. I want those kids to understand that their decisions have consequences. That choosing profit over people has names and faces and families that get destroyed. Then do it. But do it for you and Elena, not because you think you owe the world your story. She was right. Catherine was usually right about these things, had developed particular wisdom about boundaries and obligation from her own years of performing competence, while drowning beneath professional armor. The doorbell interrupted further reflection. Dorothy's signature 3 short rings that announced her arrival with the punctuality that had characterized every aspect of Julian's upbringing. Sophie's shriek of grandma echoed through the brownstone, followed by rapid footsteps that suggested his daughter had launched herself down the stairs with enthusiasm that would give Julian a heart attack if he thought about it too carefully. Dorothy Carter at 64 looked better than she had at 62. The successful heart surgery 2 years ago, having added energy that made her seem younger rather than older. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with Sophie attached to her side like Barnacle, carrying grocery bags that suggested she'd decided breakfast required augmentation, despite Catherine's pancakes. Good morning, family. Dorothy's voice carried warmth that had sustained Julian through childhood and adolescence, and military service and widowhood and everything after. Brought ingredients for proper breakfast. Catherine, baby, I love you, but those pancakes need help. Catherine laughed without offense. She'd learned early that Dorothy's kitchen criticisms came from love rather than judgment. Teach me then. I want to know how to make the good ones. The easy and Tomas, between his mother and his fiancée, not girlfriend, not partner, but woman, he'd asked to marry him under circumstances that felt simultaneously too fast and perfectly timed, made something warm bloom in Julian's chest. They'd built this, the 4 of them. Built family from choice and circumstance and stubborn refusal to let tragedy be final word. While Dorothy and Catherine collaborated on pancake improvement, Julian helped Sophie set the table with the mismatched plates they'd accumulated through combination of thrift stores and donations. His daughter narrated her birthday party planning with enthusiasm that suggested she'd been strategizing since waking. And we can do art therapy session before cake so the new kids feel comfortable. Then maybe trust falls. Do you think 8-year-olds are too young for trust falls? Definitely too young for trust falls. But Grandma did trust falls with the teenagers last week, and nobody got hurt. Teenagers have better motor control than 8-year-olds. Julian ruffled her curls with affection that came easier now than it had in those first years after Elena died, when every touch carried weight of absence. How about we stick with art therapy and cake and letting kids just be kids? Sophie considered this with the seriousness she applied to all negotiations. Okay, but if they ask for trust falls, I'm saying you said no, so you're the bad guy. Fair enough. They ate breakfast together around the table Julian had built from reclaimed wood last spring, not perfect, slightly uneven in ways that drove Catherine crazy, but that he insisted gave it character. Dorothy's pancakes were objectively better than Catherine's, fluffy and perfectly browned with edges that crisped exactly right. Conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of people who'd learned each other's patterns. Dorothy updating them on her church choir politics. Sophie describing the new boy at the foundation who wouldn't talk but drew pictures that broke your heart. Catherine mentioning she'd been approached about serving on the board of another nonprofit focused on corporate accountability. Julian listened more than contributed content to observe his family, and they were family now configured from choice rather than biology, but no less real navigate their morning with the particular chaos that came from four strong personalities sharing space. After breakfast, while Dorothy and Sophie tackled dishes with efficiency that came from years of practiced teamwork, Catherine pulled Julian aside with expression that suggested transition from domestic mourning to foundation business. Patricia called. Blackwell's parole hearing is scheduled for next month. The news landed with weight Julian had known was coming, but hadn't prepared for. Richard Blackwell had been sentenced to 15 years federal prison 2 years ago, but federal sentencing allowed for parole consideration after serving portion of sentence with good behavior. Minimum security, white-collar facility, where Blackwell had apparently been model prisoner. The thought of him walking free after serving barely 2 years while Elena remained dead made something dark and familiar twist in Julian's gut. Are they actually going to release him? Catherine's expression hardened. Patricia doesn't think so. He's got civil judgments totaling $84 million he hasn't paid. Multiple families have submitted victim impact statements. Federal prosecutors are opposing parole. But there's a chance. There's always a chance. Catherine's hand found his squeezed with pressure that communicated shared rage at system that gave people like Blackwell opportunities for redemption while their victims stayed dead. Patricia wants us to submit statement. Describe impact on our lives. On Sophie. On foundation. Julian thought about putting words to the magnitude of what Blackwell had taken not just Elena's life, but Sophie's childhood with her mother, Julian's years of marriage. He'd never get back, Catherine's father, the thousand small moments that accumulated into lives. How did you quantify that in victim impact statement that parole board would skim before making decision based on criteria that had nothing to do with justice? I'll write it. But he already knew he wouldn't capture it adequately, that no arrangement of words could make bureaucrats understand what it meant to tuck daughter into bed every night, knowing her mother should be there to watch Sophie draw families in her pictures, because that was what she wanted most to carry, weight of Elena's absence through every milestone and celebration. We'll write it together. Catherine's voice carried finality. You and me and Sophie if she wants. Patricia said families writing jointly carry more weight because it demonstrates collective harm rather than individual grief. The strategic calculation in that, the requirement to transform personal devastation into persuasive document that followed formatting guidelines and word count limits made Julian want to put his fist through the wall Dorothy had just painted last month. But he wouldn't because Sophie was in the next room and because violence solved nothing and because the best revenge was exactly what they'd built foundation that helped hundreds of kids' family that thrived despite Blackwell's best efforts to destroy them. Life that proved love was stronger than hate. I need to get to the foundation. Julian checked his watch. Brandon's bringing his sister today for intake assessment. First time she's agreed to talk to anyone since their mom died. Catherine nodded understanding. Go, I'll handle the Columbia prep work. We can work on the parole statement tonight after Sophie's asleep. The kiss goodbye carried weight that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with partnership. Two people who'd learned to carry burdens together rather than alone, who discovered that sharing weight made it bearable rather than having it. The foundation had become Julian's second home in ways that should have felt like work, but instead felt like purpose. The brownstone they'd renovated 2 years ago now hummed with activity. Children in art therapy room, working with Patricia Chen, no relation to the lawyer teenagers in music studio, recording tracks that channeled grief into hip-hop, that made Julian feel simultaneously old and proud case managers meeting with families in offices that had once been abandoned rooms filled with trash. Nina Rodriguez met him in the hallway outside his office. She'd left Hayes Enterprises 6 months after Blackwell's arrest to become Foundation's chief operating officer, bringing organizational genius that had transformed chaotic passion project into sustainable nonprofit. Brandon's here with his sister. She's 12. Mom died 4 months ago in factory accident, safety violations, no workers' comp company, declared bankruptcy to avoid liability. Dad's overwhelmed with 3 kids and 2 jobs. Brandon's been essentially raising his siblings. The story was familiar in ways that made Julian's chest ache. They heard versions of it constantly, parents dying because companies cut corners, because safety cost money, because profit mattered more than lives. Every intake was a reminder of why they existed, why the work mattered even when it felt impossible. Julian found Brandon in the common room, 15 years old, but carrying himself with weariness that belonged to someone twice his age. His sister Maya sat beside him, looking simultaneously terrified and defiant, dark eyes tracking every movement like prey animal calculating escape routes. Brandon. Julian kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. Good to see you again. This must be Maya. The girl studied him with assessment that reminded Julian painfully of Sophie at 6. Same hypervigilance, same readiness to flee, same bone-deep understanding that the world wasn't safe and adults couldn't be trusted to keep their promises. I don't need therapy. Maya's voice came out harder than her 12 years should have allowed. I'm fine. Brandon's expression suggested they'd had this argument multiple times already. Maya, I said I'm fine. Her voice cracked on the final word, betraying emotion she was working desperately to contain. Julian sat down in a chair across from them, careful to maintain distance that wouldn't feel threatening. Nobody's saying you're not fine. Your brother thought you might like to meet some other kids who've been through similar stuff. No pressure to talk about anything you don't want to. Maya's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why do you care? You don't know me. You're right. I don't know you. Julian leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze with the steady certainty that came from years of watching Sophie navigate her own grief. But I know what it's like to lose someone who mattered. My wife died 6 years ago, left me with a daughter about your age at the time, and we survived because people cared even when we couldn't understand why they would. What happened to your wife, Julian? Thought about deflecting, about maintaining professional boundaries. Patricia, the therapist, had insisted were important. But Maya was asking real question that deserved real answer, was testing whether he'd be honest or feed her sanitized bullshit designed to make her feel better without actually engaging with her reality. She was murdered by a man who valued money more than human life. He killed her because she discovered he was stealing from the company where she worked. Maya absorbed this with the particular stillness that came from processing information that confirmed what she already suspected about the world. Did they catch him eventually? Took 6 years, but he's in prison now. Does that make it better? Knowing he got punished, Julian considered lying. Offering platitude about closure and justice served. Instead gave her the truth she was actually asking for. No, it doesn't make it better. My wife is still dead. My daughter still grew up without her mother. Justice doesn't fix that. But it means he can't hurt anyone else. And we built something from what happened, this place, this foundation, that helps kids like you survive what we survived. Maya's expression flickered with something that might have been interest before armor snapped back into place. I don't need help surviving. I'm doing fine. I believe you. Julian's tone carried no challenge. You're here taking care of your brother, even though you're hurting. That takes real strength. But sometimes strong people need support too. Not because they're weak, but because being strong all the time is exhausting. Brandon's hand found his sister's shoulder, squeezed gently. Maya, just look around. You don't have to do anything. Just see what it's like. The resistance in Maya's posture suggested she was preparing to refuse to maintain walls that kept everyone at safe distance. But then Sophie appeared in the doorway of the common room, carrying her worn companion and a drawing tablet, looking uncertain in ways she rarely did at the foundation. Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm 8. My mama died when I was little too. Want to see what I'm drawing? The directness of the approach, no preamble, no therapeutic language, just one kid who understood reaching out to another seemed to penetrate Maya's defenses in ways Julian's careful professionalism couldn't. Maya studied Sophie for a long moment before nodding slowly. Okay. Sophie settled onto the couch beside Maya and opened her tablet, showing drawings that documented her own journey through grief, pictures of families configured different ways, images of sadness and hope existing, simultaneously art that made pain visible without trying to fix it. Julian caught Brandon's eye and gestured toward the hallway. They stepped outside the common room, leaving Sophie and Maya to their conversation. How are you holding up? Julian kept his voice low enough not to carry. Brandon's expression cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion beneath the competence. I'm tired. Dad's working doubles trying to keep up with bills. Maya won't talk to anyone. Little brother still wets the bed because he thinks if he sleeps too hard, Mom won't come back. And I'm supposed to hold everything together because I'm the oldest. The weight in those words, the particular burden that came from being parentified child who couldn't be child anymore, made Julian want to find whoever made the factory safety decisions that killed their mother and ensure they understood exactly what their cost-cutting had cost this family. You're doing an incredible job. Julian's hand found Brandon's shoulder. But you don't have to do it alone. That's what we're here for. Support for the whole family, not just your sister. Brandon's eyes welled with tears he had probably been holding back for months. I don't know how to do this. How to be dad and brother and still go to school and have any kind of life. Julian thought about the early years after Elena died, about nights when Sophie cried for her mother, and Julian had no answers about the bone-deep exhaustion that came from single parenting while carrying grief that felt heavier than any rucksack he'd humped through Afghanistan. One day at a time, some days 1 hour at a time. You do the next right thing, and then the next, and eventually you look up and realize you've survived another day. It's not inspiring and it's not pretty, but it works. Brandon nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes with the particular shame that came from crying in front of adults. In the bedwetting, that's normal. Julian kept his voice matter of fact. Sophie did it until she was 7. Trauma manifests in all kinds of ways. We can connect you with pediatrician who specializes in this stuff, help you manage it without making him feel worse about it. That would be good. Thank you. They returned to the common room to find Sophie and Maya deep in conversation about art supplies, the walls between them already lowered in ways that would take adults months to achieve. Sophie's gift for seeing people's pain and meeting them exactly where they were continued to humble Julian with its generosity. Over the next hour, they toured the Foundation art therapy room, where kids could express feelings they couldn't verbalize, music studio, where grief became songs, quiet room, where overwhelmed children could retreat when the world got too loud, kitchen where Dorothy taught cooking classes that were really lessons in finding comfort in ritual and routine. Maya maintained skeptical distance, but Julian watched her armor crack incrementally with each new space, each child who made eye contact and smiled, each adult who treated her like person rather than problem to be solved. By the time they left, Maya had agreed to come back Thursday for art therapy session. Small victory, but Julian had learned that transformation happened in increments rather than revelations, that healing was marathon rather than sprint. After they left, Sophie found Julian in his office reviewing grant applications with the particular determination she applied when wanting something. Can Maya come to my birthday party? She seems nice and sad, but nice sad, not mean sad. Julian studied his daughter, this 8-year-old, who'd somehow learned to categorize grief into taxonomies that made sense only to her, but that captured truth adults spent years in therapy trying to articulate. If it's okay with her brother and her dad, then yes. Sophie's smile could have powered solar grids. Perfect. She needs to see that people who understand sad stuff can still have fun. The wisdom of that, the understanding that wussy and grief weren't mutually exclusive, that surviving trauma didn't mean abandoning happiness, represented lessons Julian had spent decades learning that his 8-year-old daughter seemed to understand instinctively. The afternoon dissolved into familiar rhythm of foundation work, meeting with case managers about families needing additional support, reviewing budget with Nina to ensure they could sustain expansion plans, taking call from potential donor who'd read the Times article and wanted to contribute. By 5 p.m., Julian's head ached with the particular exhaustion that came from emotional labor masquerading as administrative work. He gathered his things and headed home to the brownstone where Catherine would be waiting, where Dorothy had probably stayed to help with dinner, where Sophie would be drawing or reading or conducting elaborate imaginary scenarios with stuffed animals. The walk from Foundation to home took 12 minutes through streets that had become familiar in ways Julian's apartment in Queens never had. Park Slope felt like neighborhood rather than collection of buildings. People greeted him by name, asked about. Sophie mentioned they'd seen the Times article and thought the Foundation's work was important. He found Catherine in the kitchen preparing dinner with Dorothy's supervision, some elaborate dish that required more steps than Julian had patience for, but that would taste incredible because Catherine approached cooking with same determination she'd once applied to quarterly earnings reports. How was Brandon's sister, Catherine asked, without looking up from vegetables She was chopping with competence that would have been impossible 3 years ago. Hurting, angry, scared, but she agreed to come back Thursday. That's progress. Dorothy appeared from the pantry, carrying the ingredients Julian didn't recognize. That girl needs to see she's not alone. When's her birthday? Not sure. Why? Because birthdays matter. Dorothy's tone suggested this was obvious. Find out and make sure she gets cake and candles even if it's not party. Everybody deserves to feel celebrated. The simple wisdom of that, the understanding that small rituals carried weight during grief that threatened to collapse everything, made Julian grateful for his mother's presence in their lives, for her insistence that love showed up in casseroles and cakes and attention to details that seemed insignificant but weren't. After dinner, the elaborate dish did taste incredible. They settled in the living room that had become their gathering space. Sophie sprawled on the floor working on birthday party invitations she was designing by hand because store-bought cards lack personality. Dorothy occupied the armchair she'd claimed as hers, working on knitting project that had grown to impressive dimensions over past months. Catherine curled against Julian on the couch, laptop open, as she reviewed foundation financials with the focus she'd once applied to Hayes Enterprises budgets. We should talk about the parole statement. Catherine's voice broke the comfortable silence. Patricia needs it by next week. Julian felt Sophie's attention sharpen despite her continued focus on invitations. His daughter possessed uncanny ability to track adult conversations while appearing completely absorbed in other activities. What parole statement? Sophie's question came with a directness that characterized her approach to everything. Julian and Catherine exchanged glances. They'd agreed on honesty with Sophie about age-appropriate topics, but explaining parole hearings felt complicated in ways that might require nuance beyond 8-year-old comprehension. The man who hurt Mama, Mr. Blackwell, is asking to be let out of prison early. We need to write letter explaining why we think he should stay there. Sophie set down her markers with deliberation that suggested she was processing implications. Will they let him out? We don't know. Dorothy's voice carried the gentle honesty she'd always used with difficult topics. That's why the letter matters, to help the people who decide understand what he did. Sophie absorbed this with the particular stillness that preceded pronouncements that were simultaneously childish and uncomfortably wise. Can I write letter too? Julian's throat closed completely. The thought of his 8-year-old daughter putting words to the magnitude of what Blackwell had taken from her, putting grief and loss and childhood without mother into letter that strangers would read, felt simultaneously necessary and unbearable. You don't have to, baby girl, but I want to. Sophie's expression carried determination Julian recognized as genetic inheritance. He took my mama. I should get to tell them what that means. Catherine's hand found Julian squeezed hard enough to communicate shared emotion they couldn't voice with Sophie watching. Okay, Julian's voice came out rougher than intended. We'll write our letters together. All of us. Dorothy nodded approval. That's right. This family stands together. They spent the next hour discussing what they wanted to say, what mattered most, how to articulate impact of Blackwell's crimes in ways that captured truth without descending into rage that would undermine credibility. Sophie's letter was shortest, but most devastating. Here are people who decide my name is Sophie Carter, and I'm 8 years old. Mr. Blackwell killed my mama when I was 2, so I don't really remember her except from pictures and stories my daddy tells me. I know some people think because I was little, it doesn't matter as much. But it matters a lot. I had to grow up without mama reading me bedtime stories or teaching me to braid my hair or taking me to the park. My daddy does all that stuff, and he's really good at it, but sometimes I see him look sad when other kids have their mamas, and I only have pictures. Mr. Byrne. Blackwell took that from me because he wanted money more than he wanted my mama to be alive. I don't think people who do that should get to leave prison early when my mama doesn't get to leave being dead. I know I'm just a kid, so maybe my opinion doesn't count as much. But I wanted you to know that what he did still hurts, even though it was 6 years ago. It will probably always hurt. Thank you for reading this. Sophie Carter, age 8. By the time she finished reading it aloud, everyone in the room was crying, even Dorothy, who prided herself on stoic strength that sustained others. That's perfect, baby girl. Julian pulled Sophie into his lap and held her while she clung to him with the fierce certainty that he would keep her safe, even though they both knew safety was illusion that could shatter without warning. Your mama would be so proud of you. Do you think it will help keep him in prison? I think it will help the people reading understand that this isn't just about money or companies or abstract crimes. It's about real people, real families, real little girls who had to grow up without their mamas. Sophie nodded against his chest, satisfied with answer that acknowledged truth without making promises nobody could keep. Later, Sophie asleep, Dorothy gone home, and thrown in the shower. Julian sat at his desk and wrote his own letter. Words came easier than he'd expected. 6 years of grief and investigation and rage channeled into prose that was simultaneously restrained and devastating. He wrote about Elena's laugh, about the way she'd sung Sophie to sleep, about dreams they'd had for their daughter's future, that Blackwell had destroyed when he decided quarterly earnings mattered more than human life. He wrote about the investigation, about 6 years of patient documentation, while pretending not to care about watching Blackwell consolidate power, while knowing he was murderer, but lacking proof to stop him. He wrote about almost losing Catherine, about the pattern of destruction that left bodies and broken families in its wake, about the foundation they'd built to ensure no other child had to grow up the way Sophie had. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking over Brooklyn, and Catherine had fallen asleep on the couch, waiting for him to come to bed. Julian saved the letter and closed his laptop, stood at the window, watching the city wake to another day of people chasing things that mattered and things that didn't. The parole hearing would happen regardless of their letters. Blackwell might walk free or might serve full sentence. Justice was imperfect, and the system favored people who looked like Blackwell, wealthy, white, well-connected, over families like Julian's, who'd built everything from nothing and could lose it all again with single bureaucratic decision. But they'd written their truth. They'd stood together and refused to let Blackwell's crimes be minimized or forgotten or reduced to line items in sentencing guidelines. And regardless of what happened at the hearing, they had this foundation that helped hundreds of kids' family that loved each other fiercely, life that proved survival wasn't just possible, but could be beautiful. Catherine stirred on the couch, opened her eyes, and smiled with the particular warmth she reserved for moments when she caught him overthinking. "Come to bed. It's already morning. Then come to bed anyway. We can face morning together after we've slept." Julian crossed to where she lay and lifted her, despite her protests, carried her to bedroom they'd shared for 2 years, settled them both under covers that smelled like home. Outside, Brooklyn continued its morning routine, dogs being walked, children heading to school, workers commuting to jobs that mattered and jobs that didn't. Inside, Julian held Catherine and thought about Elena, about Sophie sleeping peacefully down the hall, about Dorothy's insistence that love showed up in small rituals, about Maya learning that grief didn't have to be carried alone. Where love still lives, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him. In foundations built from loss. In families configured from choice. In 8-year-olds wise enough to understand that joy and sadness could coexist. In the stubborn refusal to let tragedy be final word. Where love still lives in the space between midnight and morning, where broken people choose each other and call it home.